David, and in this video we'd like to share with you a trip we did from Brisbane to Uluru through the Simpson Desert and back to Brisbane via Alice Springs, Tennant Creek and Mount Isa.
It was a busy time to get everything packed and ready for our little adventure. The Landcruiser needed servicing, we had to buy recovery equipment, build a platform to sleep on inside the car and organize all the food. We did this trip with my cousin Beat and his friend Gomez, who traveled in Beat's company 105 series Landcruiser. We traveled to Uluru together and then they'd continue to Western Australia, while Natalie and I made our way home. Beat went windsurfing with his friends at the Ningaloo coast, which was why he carried a windsurfer on his roof.
After a night of camping somewhere out in Wobble, we continued to Birdsville. The closer we came to this small outback town, the more the roads turned into tracks, and soon we had to adjust our tyre pressure. Birdsville hardly gets any rain. On average, there are only 32 rainfall days per year, accumulating a total of 103 millimetres of precipitation. However, the days when we were passing through Birdsville were some of those few rainy days. The sky gradually turned darker and darker. The colours of the bright track and the dark sky were both impressive and a little bit scary, particularly because we had no other option than to continue towards those dark clouds. And then the rain set in. The thunderstorms and rain were heavy, but upon arrival we enjoyed a great meal at the iconic Birdsville Hotel.
The next morning it was unclear if we could continue our trip across the Simpson Desert due to the large amount of rain resulting from the thunderstorms. We wanted to get the good to go from the Simpson Desert Ranger and elder Don Rowlands. We sure hoped we could continue our trip and without the help of getting a lift by the Simpson Desert recovery truck. Once we got the green lights from Elder Don, we made our way to Big Red, which is the first of more than 1,000 sand dunes that we would cross during the next few days. Dietrich, who we met in Birdsville and who had similar travel plans, decided to join us in his Hilux. Dietrich turned out to be our scout, checking out the tracks in front of us. The big orange pole on my car was my attempt of a sand flag, which worked out well until it eventually snapped because the flag surely was way too big.
On top of Big Red, we could see the flooding that the rain had caused. The track was covered in puddles and the sand was too soft to drive through any of the water. The next few hours we spent finding our way through the flooded area, searching left and right of the track to find an opportunity to cross. We made sure to keep enough distance between our cars to recover each other if one of us got bogged. Surely that we did. The first car got stuck when trying to find a way through. The second got bogged while recovering the first, and eventually we had to use the third to recover the others. Then we had to make our way through a few more flooded areas before we had to cross a large salt lake. The risk was to break through the surface crust, but Bayard and Gomez's investigation and good judgment allowed us to make it safely to the other side. A few kilometres later, we arrived at Popal Corner, which marks the point where Queensland, South Australia and the Northern Territory meet. By hopping around the plate, you can visit each of those Australian states.
The light and the colors reflected by the endless dunes were nothing short of stunning. We stopped many times to take photos and videos, but the footage hardly does justice to the real colors and impressions of nature. There were no cars or other people, as far as you could see on the horizon. The colors changed with the position of the sun during the day. We never knew what there is to see on the other side of the sand dune. There was just the vague line of the sandy track, bushes and the blue sky. I particularly remember an occasion when we had been driving all afternoon against the glary sun and suddenly realized the stunning red colors of the dunes in our rear mirrors. We were amazed that anything can grow in this arid and harsh environment.
We also came across a few more or less native animals, such as emus, lizards, a group of camels, and lots of traces of other animals.
Of course we had a lot of fun driving. You'd never know what will await you on the other side of the dune. We got stuck several times and had to recover, particularly Dietrich, who bravely volunteered to go ahead.
Stop there!
Camping in the desert was spectacular too, with beautiful sunsets, lovely meals, and great company.
The dunes became smaller and smaller to the western side of the Simpson Desert, and the tracks increasingly rocky. There had been a fair bit of corrugation on the Simpson Desert tracks, but the stony road that followed was a real test for our tires and suspension. I did not know at the time that I had to replace my entire suspension after this trip, due to damage that would later lead to what the mechanic described as a death wobble. Due to the suspension, limited clearance, and contacting some of the dunes, one of the exhaust pipe brackets snapped off, making us sound like the home ice cream truck.
Ding, 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 ding.
So we had to stop and improvise to implement a fix in the middle of nowhere.
On the second day into the Simpson Desert, we suddenly heard a strange popping noise from the engine bay and noticed a smell. We got out of the car and found that one of our air conditioning hoses had burst. From then on, we continued our trip desert style, with no aircon, open windows, and a hot 42-degree sandy breeze in our faces. Despite being a little bit less comfortable, we felt more connected to the experience rather than being locked away in a cool cabin.
It was already evening when we arrived in Dalhousie Springs. The campsite was deserted, and we were the only travelers in the area. After a few days in the Simpson Desert, we much enjoyed a bath in the warm spring lake. The next day, we got up to make our way to Finke and Uluru. Before leaving, Natalie walked away to use the bathroom. I vividly remember when she came back and invited me to go for a little walk. It was on that walk that she told me that we were pregnant with you. From then on, your mommy and papi were the happiest people on the planet, and none of the issues with the car would worry mommy anymore. Neither the sound of our ice cream truck, the snapped fuse box in the engine bay, milk spilled all over our drawers, or the growing crack in our windscreen.
Of course, we stopped at Mount Dare Hotel, where we celebrated our successful Simpson crossing and our awesome news with a cold drink. That night, we stayed at the Geographical Centre of Australia, also called the Lambert Centre. We were told the centre is the point where Australia would balance if put on a needle and if Australia was a surface of uniform thickness. Before we said goodbye to Bayat and Gomez, we spent a day visiting Uluru, which was stunning and yet another great highlight of our trip.
Our way home to Brisbane was relaxing and fun, particularly after we had made it to Alice Springs. Another set of rolling thunderstorms made us duck into a cabin at a campsite and wait until the rain had passed. We cleaned out the car and the local mechanic replaced our aircon hose and welded the exhaust bracket back on. What a joy it was to hit the road again, with new stacks of food, dry clothes and air conditioning. We much enjoyed the trip into the Northern Territory up to Tennant Creek, which was the most northerly point of our trip. Then we turned east onto Barkly Highway.
That night, we couldn't quite make it to the next campsite and decided to sleep at a rest area of the Barkly Highway in our car. Other than our Garmin InReach, we had no other phone reception. Nobody was around and hardly any vehicles were passing by. The night was quiet and dark. We laid in the car for a while, listening to the squeaky sounds of an old windmill nearby and trying not to think of horror movies set in the Australian outback. We were just about to nod off when a car arrived and parked relatively close to us.
That was the moment when we decided to bolt. We jumped out of the car, flipped our bedding to the back, jumped into the front seats and took off. Probably we had nothing to worry about, but we certainly felt relieved when we arrived at a campsite a few hours later, and we surely slept in the next morning.
You have grown from a teeny tiny poppy seed at the time of our trip to a little boy now. We are so very pleased and grateful to have you, our dear Owen Alexander. Every day you bring joy to our lives, and we surely cannot wait to take you with us on many more adventures.